This is Jeff Badger, the Grinding Doc, and I am just going to show you a couple electron microscope photos of grinding swarf, grinding chips. For 25 years I've been collecting grinding swarf, and for 25 years I've been looking at it under an electron microscope and trying to figure out what it means, if you can learn from those chips, if you can learn something about the grinding process. And the short answer, unfortunately, is you can look at the chips and not learn much about the process. The chips all start to look the same after a while, and a dull wheel and a sharp wheel will produce chips that look surprisingly similar. A soft steel workpiece and a hard steel workpiece, a high-speed steel workpiece, a bearing steel workpiece, their chips will all look very similar. You can grind with a big grit or a small grit, chips will look similar. You can grind with a sharp wheel or a dull wheel. You can grind with oil, you can grind with water. The chips look very similar regardless of how you grind. Okay. Having said that, here are a couple pictures of chips. This is a high-speed steel. High-speed steel is difficult to grind, but what you get are long, skinny little chips. You can compare that to the diameter of a human hair, 70 microns. So the chips are thinner than the diameter of a human hair. You can compare it to the size of the bubonic plague bacterium, and you can compare it to the size of the COVID virus. COVID virus is tiny compared to the chips. Even a bacterium is tiny compared to the chips, and we tend to think of the chips as pretty thin, pretty small. You can compare that to the grit sizes in your wheel. Let's take a 150 mesh grit. It's the middle one in blue. That is about how big it is relative to the size of the chips when grinding steel. Pollen, found that on the internet and threw it out there. Tungsten carbide is a more brittle material. It has lower ductility. Tungsten carbide is small little carbide particles which are hard, held in a cobalt matrix, which is relatively soft, but there's not a lot of cobalt. And so what we get are chips. There's plastic deformation, there's ductile plastic flow. It's not a ceramic material, but those chips are short and blocky, and you don't get long, skinny chips the way you do with steel. All the concepts of grinding apply, and when I teach my course about carbide grinding, pretty much all the concepts of chip formation apply, just like they do in steel, but the chips are short and blocky instead of long and skinny. Here's nickel alloys, Inconels. Again, they look very similar to steel chips. And you can take a look at these and see that some of the chips look like something that came off of a lathe. Some of the chips look like something that came off of a drill press. Some of the chips look like something that came off of a milling cutter. And that's because a grinding grit in various ways kind of has the shape of an insert on a lathe, kind of has the shape of a cutting edge in a drill, kind of has the shape of a cutting edge in a milling cutter. Kind of depends on the orientation relative to the chip. So you get a big variety of shapes when you grind. If you want to get hardcore into it, and some people do, there are professors who devote their lives into looking at chip formation. You get a rough side and a smooth side, and you look at the shear that develops on the rough side and on the smooth side, and get into all the strains that occur during that chip formation process. Here is high-speed steel, long skinny little chips, long skinny little chips, high-speed steel, soft steel, stainless steel. They all look very, very similar in terms of their chips. Here we can see the rough side and the smooth side on different chips. Get zoomed in quite a bit there. So that's it. And those are just a few of the chip pictures that I have. I have hundreds of them to try to figure out what's going on in grinding. So that's what happens when you devote your life into grinding. You pull out the messy, muddy sludge out of the filter, you clean it off, and then you spend hours looking at grinding swarf. Jeff Badger, the Grinding Doc. I hope you found this interesting. For more pictures of grinding swarf, get a copy of the Book of Grinding.